Hey everybody, welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey. This is your co-host, Liam DeBoer. Liam, what are we talking about today?
Today, we're going to be chatting about Justin Trudeau's call for global commitment to the UN's Agenda 2030, the Commissioner of Foreign Interference's decision to keep the names of traitorous politicians confidential, the federal firearms buyback program costing taxpayers $65 million without collecting a single firearm, Israel's recent pager attack in Lebanon, and ex-Pentagon officials suggesting Canada be removed from both the G7 and NATO.
Hey guys, we just launched our Everybody versus Trudeau shirts. They're 100% cotton, super soft, sourced right here in Canada, and all proceeds go to support us at Blendr News and just sort of keep this engine running. So if you like what you see, head on over to www.everybodyversustrudeau.com and get your shirt today.
All right, let's get into it. All right, first off, we've got Trudeau champions Agenda 2030 as the UN adopts a pact that aims to increase global governance and cooperation. At the Summit of the Future in New York, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau called on world leaders to unite in addressing global challenges through a, quote, pact for the future. He stressed the importance of collaboration to confront growing instability and emphasized the need for a more just, democratic, and equitable multilateral system. Trudeau reaffirmed Canada's commitment to Agenda 2030, a global framework aimed at eliminating poverty, ensuring equal access to education, and achieving universal health coverage. So, how can Canadians trust that Trudeau is prioritizing the country's well-being when his actions consistently align with ensuring Canada follows whatever the UN deems best for the entire world?
Well, I think at the end of the day, none of this has to do with what's best for Canadians, right? So you kind of see, first things first, why are they doing this? Why do they need another pact to say, hey, we're going to work together? Well, they already have the UN, they already have the WHO, they already have all these organizations. So the reason they're doing this is because they know they're losing their grasp on things right now. Things are starting to unravel. So they're like, let's just re-up on this pact. We're all bros, right? Bros. Like that's what's happening here. Because there's nothing, there's no actionable step beyond what they're already doing. Really, you know what I mean? They're like, well, we're going to work on poverty. They've been doing that. And poverty has increased significantly in Canada. We're going to work on education. Education has declined significantly in Canada, even more so in the US. Oh, how about healthcare? We're going to work on healthcare. 10 out of 10 we are right now out of prosperous nations in primary care. So we're not doing any of these things well. So it doesn't really matter what Trudeau says. His actions speak louder than those words. This is because they're losing sort of their grasp on the situation. But I think the significance of this is really the left versus the right. And I think that's what's happening here. The Western world's been primarily democratic or liberal, left-leaning for the last 20 years nearly. At scale, significant countries, the ones that would matter, the ones that move the needle. And they're really losing their handle on things right now. And they're the ones that are trying to maintain, we talked about this before, they're the ones trying to maintain the democratic institutions at the top. Not even the democratic institutions nationally, but post. So sort of the global ones. Because you get guys like Trump, even Poilievre at this point, they're like, what are we doing in the UN? What's happening here? What do we, what's going on with the WHO? We don't really want to give them all this power. The UK, the US, Poilievre, these guys are very much against the pandemic treaty. But this is what you get with left versus right now. This is what they're sort of signaling. If you vote for the left right now, then you're voting to keep things status quo as they've kept them. They're going to continue using these global organizations for a smokescreen to try to accomplish whatever they're trying to do, right? Because obviously it's not these things. It's not improving poverty, education, or healthcare. The world's at war and everything's falling apart. So to me, that's just sort of their cosmetic cover. Whereas the right, or the far right, as they like to call it these days, conservatives, Republicans, we kind of want to break away from this. We want to fix our own countries. We want to work on individual liberty. And then if you go a step deeper, then it's kind of like the left is saying socialism, communism. The right is saying individual liberty, freedom, capitalism. They're waving their flag. That's what this is. So pick your side, because that's exactly, to me, what this sort of all means.
Yeah, it really comes down to a debate between internationalism versus nationalism. Yeah. And this whole word nationalism has a lot of negative connotations to it because it can get very out of control, as past dictatorships have. But there is still a need to acknowledge, say, the nation as something that has been around for all of human history. As far as any advanced civilization has been there has been nations. But then this is something that the left has pushed for over 150 years now. The socialist cause they were always, like, even Lenin himself referred to himself as an internationalist. And that was this whole idea of like everything should be under one banner. And this is what we see when you have guys like Trudeau in 2017 tell the New York Times, well, Canada could become the first post-national state, which is the idea that, yes, you cede all individual autonomy as a nation, so your national sovereignty, to bureaucracies that are operating on an international scale, like the International Criminal Justice System, the ICJ, the UN, WHO, and so on and so on. And you would have these international bureaucracies manage everything from the top down. But when it goes to that idea that, because it is like, obviously the Nazis, for instance, in the past, like national socialists. So when it comes to far right nationalism, their idea, and this was something that this was Hitler's idea, is that the German state is the peak of social Darwinism. So just like they believed that certain organisms evolve and it's like a life versus life thing to survival of the fittest, right? They also believed that that occurred on a national scale. So not just individual life organisms, but also societies go to war against one another.
Right.
The fittest survives. And so they thought that, like the Nazis thought that the German state, the German nation should evolve to take over the globe. So in a sense, they're both the same. It's just whether the leftists believed that essentially all borders should just crumble until there's only one world.
Interesting.
And then the German and the Nazi thought was our borders should expand until they encompass everything. So it gets to the same endpoint
really
one way or
parallel.
another.
Yeah.
It's just about whether you grow or whether you decay everything.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
No, I totally agree with that. That's a really good perspective. That's I hope people that see things the way the left does right now consumes that bit of information and processes that, because that does cause a bit of it forces you to see things a different way. That's a very good point.
And I think because this is something I've been like, okay, so how do you acknowledge that there is a place in the world for the nation, but without getting into this hardcore nationalism? And actually, Orwell, in one of those essays there, the Selected Essays book that of his, he talks about the difference between patriotism and nationalism. I actually thought this was really, really good distinction to make, because so he was saying that patriotism is actually the best antidote to nationalism. And a lot of people think of them as the same, but a patriot is somebody that subordinates themselves to the nation and goes, okay, I want to give back to this nation. I'm patriotic. I like this nation. So I want to give to it, or I want to uphold it or celebrate it, whatever, right? Nationalists would tend to be like, our nation is superior, and then we should exert that power over other nations.
Right.
So it's whether you kind of give yourself to the nation, or whether you want that's like the patriotism aspect, or then the nationalism aspect would be we're superior and we should dominate everyone.
Right.
So
it's pretty easy to see which one makes sense there.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, I think we're just going to go through this period over the next decade or so where there's just an ongoing conversation, well, probably more so an ongoing argument about the two. And what you're going to see from the left is they're going to continue to weaponize terms, right? They're basically going to say any patriotism or nationalism, it doesn't matter. Let's think about it in the optimistic, positive side. They're always going to continue to skew that to be a big problem, to be racist, to be this, to be that, to try to prove their point. But at the end of the day, look, it's hard enough to run a municipal government effectively, let alone a provincial government, let alone a national government. And, you and I say this all the time, what you need, in Nova Scotia is very different from what you need in BC, which is very different from what you need in Ontario versus very different from what you need up north, right? In like the Northwest Territories. It's significantly different in this country. So if you think you've got one person in one office that can sort of run everything and do the best for everyone, it's very, very flawed thinking. So that's why we have sort of multi-layered government. But the further and further away you get, the less understanding they have of the situation. That's never going to change. We have a growing population. It's just not going to change. And things are getting more complex and a little bit messy, obviously, in Canada and everywhere with a lot of the immigration stuff. Like, why I'm saying that is we need policy change a little more rapid than usual. There's ebbs and flows to it. But right now, because of what we're doing to the country, we do actually need more policy to be evolving to sort of suit the needs of what's happening here. So again, it's actually a time when you do need a government that's very focused on your country to fix your problems. The last thing we need is to be ceding power to global governments that have no idea what's really going on here and just have a more globalized agenda.
Well, and we've talked about it on this podcast before too, right? About how and this isn't just coming out of my head. There's people far smarter than I where it goes like the falling of globalism is inevitable just simply through population collapse. Like there's going to be certain regions, like the example I've used before is like China's population is going to massively collapse over the next generation or two. And to the point where all of a sudden their industrial base, like they literally won't have the numbers to do the manufacturing they currently do.
Right.
And so that interferes with us, our goods and services, our supply chains. Like we saw it in the COVID, what happens when two countries can't trade goods as well as they can. Well, now you're completely short because like couldn't get cars because couldn't get the semiconductors and the chips for those cars. And so when it comes to this idea of like, you need to govern for the country that you're living in, it's like, yes, our like globalism is going to fall. So you can rely on these other nations in a generation or two. And we should be prepping now for that scenario where you go, okay, like we've got 20 years until there's certain things we can't buy from the other side of the world. We need to spend the next 10 to 20 years promoting or like even just turning back manufacturing into our country. But you see them doing the exact opposite, other than like, obviously there's a few things like Telesat and whatever, they'll say that
that's
they're
bullshit.
Helping. Yes. But it's like,
like
when it comes to like
domestic manufacturing and production,
it's like,
sustainability. I don't mean sustainability environmentally. I mean to be able to sustain yourself without outside help. You know what I mean? Like, we need to get back to that point. Canada should have no problem doing it. But like you said, it's going to take a while to rebuild that infrastructure. That's a very economically turbulent process.
Yeah.
So it's like, you keep depending on these global governments for things they can't provide. And you're kind of, if you think about it in terms of economics, you go, okay, it's going to cost X number of dollars. Let's call it $1 trillion for fun. It's arbitrary. And it's going to take this much time. Okay, it's going to take 20 years. Well, if you continue to push it off and then you want to do it in 10 years, because eventually, like you said, chickens are coming home to roost. This is going to happen. Well, now you've got that same budget in a much tighter timeline. It's so much harder to effectively make that change. So it's, as soon as you know it's coming, the best thing you can do is start that process. Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good point.
And I think the silver lining here that I want to say too is like Peter Zion is the one that I've got a lot of this picture from. He's a geopolitical strategist, but he's pointed out that North America actually, as long as it makes the right decisions leading up to these moments, it will actually be the best off, because so you've got America, which their population isn't collapsing like the rest of the world. So you can look at America as like the consumer base.
Yeah.
Canada and America together have a vast amount of resources.
Yeah.
And then so we're like resource steady, essentially. We don't have to rely on those other sides of the
Mexico
world.
doing all the manufacturing and
production.
production.
And then you have Mexico, which is coming up in the industrialization where they can do the cheap manufacturing. And so between these three nations, you've actually got, and there's no geographical issues because we're interconnected.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be like some areas in the country or around the world, that are really going to struggle.
No, I totally agree with that. Yeah. It's like you said, though, it's just back to sort of this point. This is what your vote means today, because the left is going one direction, the right's going the other. Yeah. So, choose wisely.
Yeah. The last thing I actually want to touch on just before heading into the last thing is the, you hear one of their goals is like eradicate poverty, right?
Yeah.
This is a very interesting perspective. Is like poverty is relative. So considering, I know we have like the $2 a day number or whatever is like the measurement for international poverty, but this is actually something that Marx got completely right, was that I can't remember the exact term he used for it, but let's say it was relative well-being. So somebody doesn't see themselves as well off if everyone else around them is doing great, right? So they think I'm doing terrible. But if you take the average poor person making, say, $30,000 a year, $25,000 a year, which would be considered poverty in Canada, I think, actually, no. Poverty in Canada is, I think, what is the poverty line in Canada?
26 to 28,000 in annual income. For a family of four, it's 45 to 50,000.
Oh, okay. So yeah,
you're close.
So pretty close. A person making $25,000 today, considered in poverty in Canada, is living better off than a king would have 200 years ago. access to plumbing, free like medical supplies around. So like the idea of poverty in and of itself is like, how do you eradicate this when it's relative? And that's where you get to this leftist idea. Well, okay, to eliminate poverty, we all need to be the exact same. We all need to have the exact same. And that's where they get to it, because because poverty is relative. So as long as there is differences, then there's a problem to fix.
Yeah, I mean, it's an easy way. That's actually a really good point. I think it's simple when you think like, you have friends that go to Bali. They're like, oh, we go to Bali for the winter or something. It costs us like, $50 for like a 4-bedroom house per night kind of thing, when they're staying there or whatever. And it just gives you the perspective. It's like, or you go to Mexico, it's the same thing. You go to different places in the world and your money goes way further. So it's just, yeah, I mean, it is all just sort of a relative economy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something, essentially what you're getting at is you can never solve the problem.
No, poverty, like it's going to be there. All right, moving on to our next story. We've got the commissioner will not identify Canadian parliamentarians suspected of colluding with China. During hearings in Ottawa, Commissioner Marie-Josée Hogue confirmed that MPs and senators accused of colluding with China, as outlined in the NSICOP 2024 report, will not be publicly named in the inquiry into foreign interference in federal elections. This decision follows public outrage after the report criticized Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government for ignoring intelligence warnings about foreign interference from China and India. Allegations include Canadian politicians receiving funds from foreign diplomats in transactions resembling money laundering. Despite 68% of Canadians supporting the release of names, Hogue stressed the need for fairness and the sensitivity of intelligence. Former CSIS heads warned that failure to address these issues could undermine public trust in Canadian institutions. The final report will address the allegations in a classified format, but opposition leaders are calling for more transparency, especially as the federal election approaches. So, how can we still claim Canada is a functioning democracy when individuals with known ties to hostile foreign governments appear to be eligible to run for office in the next election?
It's a tough one, isn't it?
Yeah.
You just kind of go, how could you possibly say this to the citizens of Canada and then have any of them vote for a Liberal? Because how do you know which one's which? You know that I've seen varying numbers, 9, 12, 16, 19. But let's just round it and say 10. It looks like at least 10 Liberal MPs have colluded with foreign governments, China and India, to swing elections. How do you vote for any of them? How do you vote for anybody in that entire party? How do you vote for the man leading the party? How is this party even allowed to exist in this country? We've gotten too soft as a nation. I don't really agree with revolution violently. It's not really my vibe. I think there are better ways to do things, but they've crossed some really, really bright red lines, and this is one of them. You have several members of your party that are in bed with foreign governments to work against the nation. So when that happens, I don't understand how we don't have sort of a string you can pull the chute on this and just be like, okay, well, this party's got to go. We got to overthrow the government. There should be something there should be some sort of mechanism in our government that goes, if this happens, well, these are traitors. This is treason.
We in World War II in the 1940s, we executed traitors.
Right. And I'm not saying we need to execute people, but what I'm saying is there needs to be a mechanism in place that we go, well, the party's completely corrupt. Now, we all know politicians are corrupt at scale. It seems that most of them are anyway. But in this particular case, it's very, very clear that the Liberal Party is corrupt. They're compromised. It looks like it's from the top down. And there's a dozen or so of these people, at least, that are working against our country. How is there no mechanism in place where we can pull this lever and go, you guys got to get the fuck out? Okay, we don't kill them. I'm fine with that. No problem. But they got to be gone now. Like now. Otherwise, like you said, what kind of democracy do we have here? And instead of even highlighting or pointing these people out or at least letting like our judicial system deal with this, like, we're going to run cover for them. Fuck you guys, Canada. What? Doesn't make any sense to me at all. Absolutely horrific.
Yeah, and I'm not saying we should go back to World War II ways, but I'm just, the point that I'm making is like, at one point, the ultimate penalty, to no penalty, to like facilitating it at this point.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if you know something is happening and you allow it to keep happening, you are facilitating it. So we've gone from, we'll take your life if you do this, to we'll cover for you if you do this. How does this make sense?
The system is so broken.
So I think this goes to the idea, I believe it was one of the Weinstein brothers were talking about the concept of like managed democracy. is that we liked to believe throughout, say, the 20th century that we were living in like what we typically picture as democracy, which is, I guess the best analogy I could use is like, if everyone's playing a game, let's say it's like a sport, then all teams and the refs, everybody is kind of in this democratic process of voting on how the game should be played, and everybody is respecting one another. But then what you really come to learn as you dive deeper and deeper into these things is there is a commission which then gives people the choices of the refs they can have over the game, but those refs are actually subordinated to the commission. And so this is like the concept of managed democracy is we're having this, we don't actually live in democracy in any real sense. It's like, hey, this is where we're going. And as long as you guys are allowed to vote and stay within the bounds of what we tell you is acceptable, then you guys can have your democracy. But yeah, it's becoming more and more apparent, especially when you see things like this, where you don't actually live in a real democracy that is accountable to the people.
And this is why I get surprised. I was talking to one of my buddies today. He sent me a message, just like, how are Canadians not absolutely losing their shit over what's going on in this country? And it was about a particular article that I wrote. And I just go, dude, every single day I wake up and wonder how there's been no revolution in this nation. It's like, it doesn't matter what you like point at any policy, any issue. It doesn't really matter. It's just becoming more and more clear that there's a big separation between the democracy we live in and the democracy they live in. And the institutional democracy is basically untouchable, and we get to play Mickey Mouse games down here. That's pretty much all it is. And it's becoming so blatantly obvious. Like, we don't get to make any real decisions. That's what I mean by that, right? They've got everything figured out up there. The commission's got it sorted out, and they've become so blatant about it that they're now just running cover for the people on the ground. And right in our face, like, yeah, I know they're fucking with you guys, but we're not gonna make them pay the price. You just deal with it. What? And you think about that and you kind of go, how is so society, in my opinion, is always kind of on the edge. It's always kind of on the edge of everything not really being okay. You know, it doesn't matter where you look in the world, but it seems that we kind of walk this line. And think about it like walking next to the edge of a cliff. You know, generally society is 10 meters away from the cliff. You fall off, you're going to die. It's a big drop. Today, it seems like we're a meter away from the cliff.
Dancing on it.
Yeah, it seems like we're super close to this thing. And I don't understand like how Canadians aren't absolutely losing their shit, because it's so obvious. You know what I mean? And I don't even understand, like, how do you recover from this? So if you think about this two-tiered system, you have the institutional democracy, then the one we live in, the fake one, basically. So if they don't keep us happy, because there's more of us, then the institutional democracy is going to suffer. They can't keep this going. But they're making it so obvious now that we can see behind the curtain, right? The media is not working. They're not really, people, you and I were talking about this, so it's obviously not working anymore. How do you create that separation again so that we think we live in democracy, so that you're allowed to continue running your institutions? Because we've seen so much now. We've seen the wizard behind the curtain. I don't know how we go back to Oz and think everything's okay. What does their process look like to try to create those boundaries again, or create a system that is somewhat symbiotic so they can keep doing what they want? I don't know how it happens. Basically, the more obvious it becomes, you get to this point where it's like, hey, we're in charge of you, shut the fuck up. Like, that seems like that's kind of where we're going. That's what it feels like anyway, because I just don't know how you maintain the false democracy when we can see it. That's all.
Yeah. Well, and again, this isn't something that I think will happen, but this is the only thing that would actually foster some sort of trust within our institutions again, is mass accountability, like major trials being held on this kind of stuff, like the Bouquet laid down in El Salvador, where, you know, he brings everybody into an office, says everybody is under investigation for corruption. And I think we need something of that scale, like a Nuremberg trial, where you go, hey, these systems and these institutions are operating for their own purpose and at the expense of the very people that they claim to be around for. It's not that they're just becoming inefficient. It's that they're directly harming the exact people they were created to serve, which is a step past that even. But, you know, who knows? Yeah. Will Canada allow some sort of actual mass reckoning like that? Because I even do look at it from, like, I take myself out of my own, say, biases. and I lean over and I go, okay, let's say Pierre Poilievre walked into office and did say that and goes, okay, everybody is now under trial for being a traitor or corruption or whatever. If I didn't, like, if I was on the other side of the political aisle, I would 100% look at it and go, yep, this looks like you're just weaponizing the justice system against your political opponents. Like, how do you get over that hurdle as well?
Right.
Because, and that's a justifiable way to view that situation, I would think.
I agree, but I also think our judicial system has become compromised.
Yeah.
I really do. So I actually think it's harder for a developed nation like Canada or the United States to make these changes, because I think the institutions at the top are far more powerful. You go look at Bukele, or you look at Argentina, something like Malay in Argentina, you look at those, it's like, because they're a little more, the countries are a little more radical, their connection to the larger institutions, the global governance, is much looser. But they also play less significant a role. Sure, they might want them for their resources, but they don't really mess around with their politics as much. So I think when they have radical reform, it's actually easier and more effective. Sure, more violent and more aggressive, but I actually think it can change, and they can create more sovereignty and a better version of democracy. I think we're so far gone. I think we're so deep into the fold of global governance and global organizations that I don't think we can even penetrate or break down this top level of institutional democracy anymore. I think that's why they're so blatant. I think they're like, you can't do anything about it, kid. Shut up. That's the feeling I get, because otherwise, if you didn't have that kind of confidence and knowledge that you knew you could not be messed with, you wouldn't be doing this. You'd still be running smoke screens and running cover. You'd be throwing a half dozen of these people under the bus, go, oh, we really got to save democracy because those Canadians, they're going to come after us and we're going to lose a handle on this very, very quickly. But because you know they can't or won't do anything, you're like, ugh, what are you going to do about it? You're all complacent anyway. You don't even have weapons. Good luck. That's how this feels. So man, I keep saying this and I feel bad, but like, I don't know that Canada's really the spot for like the next generation anyway. Like, I don't know. This is sort of a thought that I'm processing as I'm spitting it out. So I haven't really thought it fully through, but this is how it makes me feel. I kind of go, yeah, I think that they know they've got us, and I think they're too powerful. And I don't think a Bukele or a Malay or anybody, I don't even think they would get in. I don't even think that would happen. That's why I think they're continuing to go after Trump, which is why I think they're going to do it again. I think that they're going, no, these institutions are too powerful. We can't have someone in like this. We've got more control over the lower level of democracy, whereas there they don't, like Argentina, places like that. So, yeah, I don't see an easy fix here. I really don't.
Well, and on that added front, it's never been a part of the way that we govern in Canada. Like we forget that how we've done things for the last 150 years, or even America for that instance. It is not the same as how things have been done all throughout human history, or even in other places of the world currently. So, for instance, like, yeah, we do have, our countries were both founded on democracies. So they never existed without the transfer of power only happening through elections.
Right.
But then you look at somewhere like Russia, other than in the early 1990s, like literally Russia has never had anything resembling that. It's since like year around mid 800 is when Russia was first kind of thought of as a nation. Ever since then, every single transition of power has been done through revolution or chopping a king's head off or something of this nature. They don't do elections. And then so when you come to this idea and I'm not saying we should switch to that model by any means, but
I know what you're saying though. It's part of their society, whereas here
but then
it's
you
not.
try to sell this idea of mass accountability and being like, no. There is people that are ruling over us who they don't need to have their heads chopped off, but they need some sort of level of accountability.
Repercussions, sure, whatever that looks like.
We've just never done anything like that. They're like, we don't do that. We just get rid of them in the next election. That's all we do. You're like,
yes.
Yeah, but this is a little bit further than just incompetence or dropping the ball. This is like actually pillaging the nation.
That's a really good point. So the democratic system we have in place for elections won't actually give us the tools we need to change the institutional democracy at the top by my definition of institutional democracy, whatever I'm saying at this point. Yeah, so we don't actually have the tools within society to make that change. So again, they don't even care. Vote in whoever you want. It doesn't make a difference, Jonathan. We got you by the balls. And that's what this feels like. So yeah, I mean, it's just becoming more and more blatantly obvious. But I think that's why people that are capable, people that have the wherewithal, people that aren't wearing a pair of cement boots, as I like to say it, are leaving the country.
Yeah.
You know, like if your foundation is here, your family's here, your business is here, it can be tough to move. It's a lot of work. Like I understand. But like the people that can, that's why they're running for the hills, man.
The last thing is just that I'd point out on this topic is just like a little bit of the irony on, because we're talking about keeping governments accountable and this kind of stuff. It's funny if you think about how like the founding fathers, when they set up America, their goal was to set up a limited government that is like small government.
Yeah.
They wanted it to be accountable to the people. And by setting it up within that framework, and they did draw out that framework better than any people in the past. But what did it end up creating? It ended up creating the largest government in human history by trying to put forward the smallest.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think over time, government over time becomes corrupt no matter who you are and what you do. That's just the human nature of things. Like if you look at humans, and this is kind of taking a page out of Rogan's book, but if you look at humans, like we're creatures of progress. That's all we really are. So I like to use the example of a beehive. You look at a beehive from 10 years ago, you look at a beehive today. You just knocked one down the other day, you know. It's magnificent, but it hasn't changed. It doesn't progress. But if you look at a flip phone from 20 years ago versus the newest iPhone 16, well, holy shit, they're so significantly different. In fact, if you went from the flip phone to the iPhone 16, you wouldn't even know how to manage it. You'd be like, I don't even know how any of these things work. It just opens when I look at it. What the fuck? So, you know, it's humans are creatures of progress. It's what we do. I think it's great. I think it's really fascinating. I think it's a really interesting thing, and I think it gives a lot of us sort of a feeling of purpose from time to time. You know, I think it's important. That being said, you take that same idea, right, and then you think about it for people that aren't going to do positive things with progress. They want power, and they're psychopaths. Like you said, that's what sort of the government institution attracts. So you have an organization that is small, very libertarian, but over time, enough of these people that want to make progress in their own way, they get into these institutions and they find ways to grow and expand the power that it has for their own good. That's what happens. And you do that for 250 years, and that's what you've got in America, right? So it's just sort of this inevitable path we get on anytime a government gets established.
Well, to build on what you're saying, there's also the added element of, like we're talking about with democracies, it can hinder you, I guess. Like I'm just coming up with just thinking of this off of what you were saying there, but it can almost make it worse because, okay, let's say throughout history when people were living under, say, monarchs, you were aware of the situation that you were being ruled over, that you weren't in control of those monarchs, that they had authority over you. And so the second that they started acting tyrannical or corrupt or anything of this nature, you were like, no, like, I'm not cool with this anymore. Revolt. But with democracy, it allows that illusion of being like, okay, I'm in control. So it allows that corruption to get more and more out of hand before you go, wait, we need to do something about it. I'm not in control of that machine anymore. I thought I was in control of it. And then it gets to that point too, where you have like elections. You're like, oh, this guy's corrupt, so we'll vote him out. And then 4 years later, you realize that the issue hasn't actually been resolved because it's the machine itself. It's not who's in charge of the machine. But then you tell yourself again, okay, well, we just need to get rid of that guy. And then you have another 4 years. And it's like a procrastination kind of thing of dealing with this corruption. And so like your democratic institutions actually allow that issue to get worse than if it was just an openly, say, monarch type situation.
Yeah, where you cut people's heads off. So democracy essentially become a smokescreen for authoritarianism.
Yeah.
It's an inevitability.
Yeah.
Wild.
Well, it's not much of a smokescreen anymore because they're just openly authoritarian. If we look at our next topic here, which is federal firearms buyback cost rises by tens of millions and still not even one gun has been collected. The Liberal government's firearm buyback program has faced substantial issues, with costs ballooning to at least $67 million without collecting a single firearm. Opposition Senator Don Plett criticized the program, revealing that $11.5 million was spent on undisclosed consultants. Despite demands for transparency, Government Representative Mark Gold refused to share contract details. Plett and the CEO of the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights argue that the program unfairly targets law-abiding gun owners rather than the criminals, and suggest the funds would be better spent on public safety. The Canadian Sporting Arms and Ammunition Association also raised concerns about the government's lack of knowledge on firearms. Despite the program's failures, Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc defended it as a campaign promise. The program has yet to collect any of the 1,500 banned firearm types, with estimates suggesting the total cost could exceed $750 million. Critics believe the buyback program may resurface as an election promise. So, should Canadians take comfort in the idea that even if our government harbors authoritarian ambitions, it lacks the competence to effectively implement them?
Yes and no. It's crazy to me that we have such a corrupt government in how they spend, but also such an inefficient and incompetent government in their ability to actually get anything done. You know, and it goes back to Trudeau's point at the UN, like, oh, we're going to fix poverty. Nope, worse. Healthcare. Nope, worse. Education. Nope, worse. All of it's worse under you, pal. You've done nothing but spend twice as much money and made the whole country worse. It's interesting, right? Like it's at the end of the day, it's a bad thing because you do want a government that can accomplish what it sets its mind to. The reason I say that is because if it does set its mind to doing things you don't like, at least you get closer to saying we need to change government, we need to change the system, we need to do something about this, versus just inefficiently spending your money and getting nothing done, because then you're just getting lied to the whole time. You know what I mean? It's just exactly what you're seeing here. How can they spend this much money? How can they spend $65-70 million on a program that's done absolutely nothing and not be strung up? Obviously, strung up, but you know what I'm saying? So it's because ultimately you need these institutions at this point in time to correct course. You get Poilievre in, for example. Get Pierre Poilievre in, and if he's not able to get the system to work, then what good is he? What are we doing, right? You hope that he can make some of the positive changes. Now, at the end of the day, to our previous conversation, I don't think he's going to be able to go as far as we want or do as much as we want, or at least it'll make it feel like Canada's a better place. I think at the end of the day, it's not. It's still being run by some global elites, some oligarchs, however it's being managed at the top down. But anyway, if you don't have a system that can actually accomplish anything, you got two bad eggs, right? You got people that are overspending and completely inefficient. So I know it's a bit silly, but more so to the gun buyback program in general. This is absolute nonsense, right? This has been it's such a clown show. It seems it's funny. One of the guys even said, "Look, I don't think the government knows anything about weapons or guns. They don't know what they're talking about. They don't know what they're doing. They're trying to take guns from legal hunters." Primarily, that seems to be the goal here. I think what it is more than anything is just disarming citizens. And I mean, they even tried to use Canada Post to sort of execute the gun pickup program. They're like, absolutely not.
Yeah, I'm not going to people's houses being like, give me your guns.
Yeah, not a chance. Like, nah, and they're the ones with the guns. Like, no, it's program itself is a total mess. Government inefficient spending, total mess. They should all be fired for this. And there obviously lack of efficiency and competency in getting anything done. Even though it is to our benefit in this particular circumstance, no, this is embarrassing. What the hell?
Even back in like 2014, before he ever became prime minister, Trudeau was talking about how legal firearm ownership is not the issue and how cracking down on legal firearms will not resolve the problem of crime. And this is something that I was even talking with a person who lives in our neighborhood here. He works he used to work homicide and now he works missing children. But what he was pointing out to me was that over 90% of the firearms that are used in crimes come illegally and are smuggled through the States. And then he was saying roughly in the neighborhood of 5 to 10% is firearms used that were stolen from somebody's house. So somebody broke in and stole a legally possessed firearm from somebody else and then used it in a crime. And then he was like, maybe 1 to 5%, like high end, would be actual law abiding citizens owning firearms that are committing crimes with them. So the idea that, okay, we need to disarm the citizenry in order to deal with gun violence, like that's not the issue. The issue is the smuggling of guns. 9 out of 10 of them, according to this. Well,
if you think about it, people that are using them people that are using weapons to commit crimes, they're not worried about background checks and getting guns legally. They don't want to be tied to the gun anyway. They want it to be complete. They want it to have no serial numbers on it. They don't want to be connected to it in any way, shape, or form. That's never going to change.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, for me, like the program itself is just completely flawed, top down.
Well, you can just see that their stated aims aren't their real aims when they say, we want to lower crime rates by getting rid of legal firearms, but then turn around and let violent criminals out on bail the next, like literally within minutes of them committing a crime. So you're just like, come on.
And let immigrants in that they're not doing correct background checks on, that are connected to terrorist organizations that are popping up every week right now. Like, yeah, guys, give me a break. None of it really, there's no harmony to your message, right? It's all very disjointed and just complete nonsense. I think, like you said, I think the goal is just to disarm citizens. But like you said, 26% of Canadian households own a weapon. I think that that's enough to cause a bit of a ruckus. It seems that they just don't want people to have guns anymore. They're trying, it's funny, they're fighting it in the States. You know, even Kamala Harris is like, we're not trying to take away your guns. And the next day she's like, we need to ban these guns. I'm like, oh, damn. So she said one thing on the debate stage and another thing, obviously, at a presser.
Did you see the one thing she said last week, I believe it was, where she said, we're not going to try to take away anyone's guns, but if you own a gun, you can be damn sure that, and I'm paraphrasing, but you can be damn sure that we are going to come into your home and make sure that you are using that gun legally and properly.
And just because you legally possess a gun in the sanctity of your locked home doesn't mean that we're not going to walk into that home and check to see if you're being responsible and safe in the way you conduct your affairs.
And you're like, okay, so now you're just like, we're going to top to bottom surveil every single gun owner to the point where we look inside of their homes. Like, that's crazy.
I think when she goes off script, shit doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
I think she's just, I'm just going to wing it. No, don't do it. I think it gets away from them, right? So she's yeah, I mean, look, any of these programs, you look at what happened in Australia, right? They've been disarmed. So they can't fight back. So there was a big thing going on through COVID. And they were just basically corralled into these big sections where you're like, you can't leave your city zone through COVID. And the police are just firing rubber bullets at them.
And they put people in actual quarantine camps too.
Yeah.
Like being like, you're in that shed for a week and do not come out. And there's going to be people in hazmat suits that come by and check on your shed every couple of hours.
I think the concern here really is like putting how poorly they ran this program aside. Governments are always thinking a few steps ahead because that's all they have to do. And it's the same thing like I'm doing a talk on the Pandemic Preparedness Act, the Bill C-293. They may not use these tools today to suppress you, but these tools give them the power to do so. And it's the same thing with guns. It's like, look, they may not be planning on causing enough trouble that you'd want to use a gun today, but they're making sure you don't have one because when they do that, they want to know you can't fight back.
Yeah. All right, moving on to our next story. We've got Hezbollah vows revenge against Israel for deadly pager blasts in Lebanon that killed several and injured thousands. Lebanon has been struck by a series of deadly explosions targeting Hezbollah, causing widespread casualties and escalating tensions with Israel. Over 2 days, explosive devices hidden in everyday items, pagers, and handheld radios were detonated, resulting in at least 37 deaths and over 3,000 injuries. On Tuesday, pagers rigged with explosives killed 12 and injured around 2,700 people, while on Wednesdays, radios converted into bombs killed another 20 and injured 450 more. Hezbollah has accused Israel of orchestrating both attacks, claiming that Israeli operatives hid small explosives in Taiwanese-made pagers and ICOM ICV-82 radios. So how terrifying do you find this new era of warfare?
Well, if I'm being absolutely honest, putting aside what side these people are on, it's kind of a crafty move. It was kind of a crafty move. It was pretty clever. You know, I mean, from what I understand, their plan was to wait until Hezbollah went on a full-bore attack. Then they blew them all up to cut their communication. It's pretty smart. You know what I mean? For whatever it's worth. If you think about warfare and like how the game's played these days, yeah, I mean, that's kind of a clever move. Again, I'm not pro-violence, but if you think about it from a tactical perspective, yeah, it's not a bad plan. But look, I think what's happening here in the Middle East is larger scale war is inevitable. I think we see that every day because we see things like that and you go, well, this should kick off a massive war in the Middle East that should go well beyond Israel and Palestine, but it is not happening yet. But all these little things are happening, like the Hamas general or whatever his position was being killed in Iran. You go, well, that's it. They're going to kick off here. So it's like, I think that they all know there's going to be a much bigger war. And I think the bigger players involved, your US, your China, your Russia, who are, I think, in my Iran even, who are pulling the strings, I go, not yet. It's not time yet. I think they're sort of posturing and positioning. But I still, like you and I've talked about this. I think World War III is here. I think the bigger countries are just not ready for it yet.
I still think there's a chance that you can stave it off, but I mean, we're definitely in the introduction to the World War. Like, if you were to think about it as a book, for instance, it's like we're in the introductory chapter, like laying out what could happen, like what's going to on the current path. But I think there's still time to go the other way. But the issue is that the people that are in charge of the global order, the NATOs of the world and such, don't seem to want that. They seem to be trying to push it in. But when it comes to the whole idea of, say, crafty move, one thing that I wanted to point out in regards to this is a lot of people online seemed to think that it was like, okay, we just know who these Hezbollah people are, and then we're going, like, the Mossad and Israel just can take over their devices and just cause their devices to blow up, because people were like immediately afterwards be like, how long until there's blow up a dissident cell phone or whatever? No, it's they intercepted a supply shipment that was going to Hezbollah, took all of the stuff, took them apart, put bombs inside of them, and then let it continue going, which is still, to be able to pull off that maneuver without anybody catching on.
That's what I mean. That's pretty clever.
That's very,
from my understanding, they were Taiwanese made, but they traveled through Hungary. So there's this whole, like, they're still kind of trying to put the pieces together there. But yeah, because obviously you had some sort of complicit, some other nation was complicit here. Someone let it happen. Maybe not necessarily the nation, but people. Someone was paid off, something like this, So as I said, like for what it's worth, obviously you don't want to see people die, and I don't like war, and I don't like death or violence, but it's not a bad move. To your point about the war thing, there's a couple things I would kind of point out right now that make me feel like we're still always edging closer towards it, right? Obviously, I just explained the Middle East, and I know it's more complex, but I'll keep it macro, high level. You've got the war in Russia and Ukraine, and you've got basically the West on the edge of allowing Ukraine to use their weapons inside Russia, which Russia's like, don't cross that line. However that pans out, that pans out. You've got the group of nations now. There's like the Quad something. I forget what it's called. Sorry for my lapse there. You got Japan, America, Australia, and India. They're not in an official capacity, but they're now working to counter China in the Indo-Pacific region because China said, hey, we're taking Taiwan in 2030. Bottom line. So you look at that, you go, okay, well, China's saying, hey, we're taking Taiwan. So you know that's coming. You see that as 2030. Well, that's 6 years away from now. And then you kind of look at the plans, the economic plans. The West doesn't just have a plan to fund Ukraine now. They've got a plan to fund them for the next 5 or 6 years, to keep funding them. They're not saying what the funding is for. You could argue, well, it's for rebuilding, whatever. But they've already got a plan to continue throwing money at this nation, basically to westernize it. But it seems like, well, there's no end in sight here for this war. And then again, you kind of just look at the Middle East and all the Iranian proxies and all the things that are happening, and you just kind of go, this is continuing to bubble up. And all these nations are continuing to position themselves, and they're kind of, there's all these little smaller proxy wars happening. But the big nations are involved, right? Even stuff like it's happening in Venezuela, like that didn't turn into something bigger, but you had America and a lot of the West going, you need to show us your election results. Then you have China and Russia going, attaboy, let's keep it going, because they know he's basically got an authoritarian government right now. So I was like, hey, if they get in the mix, this gets a bit nasty. They didn't, but you even see those nations now, big countries, China, Russia, United States, the West, they're weighing in on these sort of more regional issues. I just think it feels like it's just a matter of time. I mean, again, like it's a feeling. I don't have enough hard data, but the things that I just expressed make me feel like it's on the horizon, and I don't know if we can go back at this point.
I think what scares me most about that is just knowing the level that technology is at with warfare. Like it is scary to see at this point where you're just like, yeah, okay, within minutes you can attack thousands of targets that are all completely scattered, like instantaneously. That's a crazy, like, we have not had that ability before. You even look at a lot of the stuff, say, coming out of Russia and Ukraine, like it's hard to watch some of these things. Like you watch a dude like a group of people walk into a covered house and then like
just going to say the same thing.
FPV drone, like one of those extremely small that you could fit in the palm of your hands, probably just is rigged with like some level of C4 on it or something.
Yeah.
It just flies through a window, detates the entire
everybody.
House. You're just like, how do you defend against that?
That imprinted on me a little bit because it's like you can combat, like if people are firing rockets, you've got, your Iron Dome, but something like that, it's like this thing can fly a foot off the ground. It's slow. It moves slowly. You have no idea. Then it just kind of zip, bang, goes in the window, boom, everybody. I was like that when I saw that, I was like, oh my God,
how do you defend?
Safe.
Yeah. And then I think it was you and I having this conversation the other day, but then like people need to realize that the technology that the military has in their hands is about 20 to 30 years ahead at any given point of what you have. What you have knowledge of.
Yes.
And so like the great example that I like to point out is, when did internet start being wide use? Like mid 90s when it started, like households started to play with it.
Yeah, late 90s. Late 90s was pretty broad use, yeah.
So DARPA in the United States started experimenting with internet in the 1960s. So like 30 years before people started using it at all, America was starting to play with this technology because their whole idea of it was that we need some sort of decentralized information system in case of nuclear war with the Soviet Union. Like if the Soviet Union nukes Washington, we can't lose all the database of all information we have. So we need to decentralize this. And that's where they came up with the idea for the internet. But now consider that technological progress isn't linear, right? It's exponential. So the further we get down this road, that 20 to 30 year gap of technology is actually way crazier. Like the difference between technology today and 20 years from now is going to be exponentially different than, say, the technological innovation from 1970 to 1990. And so, like, what the hell do these governments have? Like that, and I mean, this is, you get into a lot of speculation, obviously, with this kind of stuff, but that's even where you hear the Joe Rogans and stuff of the world when they, when you see these hearings about UFOs and this kind of stuff, it's like, how do I know that this isn't just some sort of fucking drone capabilities that America has now?
That's what it seems like it is more than anything.
Absolutely. It's the more logical answer.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. Yeah. 100%. Because it's like, there's no other, you listen to Elon Musk and what he goes, I got eyes on the sky. Nothing's come here. I would know. I trust that. He would be honest. So you think about that and you're like, okay, so these things are already here. You can speculate about them, being here, like being sleepers, being in the ocean, being this. You can try to come up with something, but the odds are they've already got this technology and they're just, and I think, I don't remember who it was, but they'd said, just using it once in a while, letting people think it's something crazy. Well, that lets your enemies know in other countries, we've got technology that you can't fuck with, so you better be careful. So, I mean, it's not even a bad way just to sort of keep people in check, because that is actually like a reasonable concern that I think about going, you think about how fast AI is moving. You think about the weapons we have and all this other stuff. It's like, a good example is actually Elon Musk's satellites. So his Gen 2 satellites are causing a lot more radio interference. And then scientists go, but there's no regulations for this because it's in space. So we just have to hope that SpaceX and Elon will, Starlink will kind of do the right thing. We don't have any way around this. And that's well, it's not small, but I mean, isolated incident. You see these other weapons and what these things are capable of. There's no way to regulate this stuff till it's already too late. Because like you said, the tech moves too fast, the government moves too slow, and these things can be way too deadly. So yeah, I mean, where this goes, it's that old saying, I don't know what World War III will be fought with, but I know World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones.
Yeah. Well, you look at, say, for instance, your point about posturing and how trying to signal to other foreign country, hostile governments and such to be like, look what technology we're playing with. Are you sure you want to fuck with us? I mean, hell, that seems like a little bit of what Israel was doing in the Hezbollah thing, being like, we can get you wherever we want, whenever we want. Are you sure you want to play this game?
That's what it did seem like.
Yeah. And so, but then you even think about, say, the space race between the Soviet Union and America. Everybody thought that was like, oh, well, we're just trying to explore space and who's going to be the first to do it.
Except now they're talking about having nukes up there and blowing EMPs to knock out all your satellites.
Well, the whole space race thing in the first place was the reason that came about was America couldn't sell military spending to the public, like people were like, we're not in war. Why? We don't want war. Why would we be okay with you guys spending our money on military supplies? So what they needed to do was they needed to come up with a cover in order to innovate militarily. And one of those ways was space travel. Oh, well, we're going to a new frontier. We're next step for humanity, all of this. But really the idea behind the space race was the engineering problem to send a rocket into like past the atmosphere was pretty much the exact same engineering problem as sending a rocket to anywhere on Earth. And so, well, while we were sitting here, the population was going, oh, like we're exploring space. Really what America and the Soviet Union were trying to signal to one another was, we can hit you wherever the fuck we want.
I can get you.
And and that was what they were doing behind the scenes, and the whole space race thing was just a cover.
I wonder if that's maybe why, if you're of the mind they've been to the moon, perhaps that's why they haven't really bothered since, is it was more about military posturing and military capability than it was really about going to the moon. Because if you think about it, I don't have enough evidence to say they haven't been to the moon. So, okay, they've been to the moon. But if you think about it, I don't know what other scientific technology they have to really extrapolate value from being on the moon. Like, what's the purpose? What's the point? You know what I mean? So they kind of go, yeah, we can get up here, but like, can't really do anything else. It's like you can jump in the lake and you can swim. What else can you really do in the lake? Well, not much. I guess I'll stay dry. Maybe it's the same as the moon. They go, well, we got up here, but we can't really do much. We don't really know how to manage the surface. We're not going to mine anything from here. We don't really have the advanced science to really extrapolate much value. So we don't need to jump back in. But we got the military capability now. And that's why they kind of dialed that program back. And then they just continue to advance on that front. Perhaps, makes sense.
All right, last story for the day. We've got Trudeau broke the military. US says Canada should not be in the G7 or NATO. The Trudeau government is facing mounting criticism from US officials for failing to meet NATO's defense spending target of 2% of GDP, with calls for Canada's potential removal from NATO. Elbridge Colby, a former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, argued that Canada's military neglect could justify its expulsion from both NATO and the G7. Currently, Canada allocates just 1.34% of its GDP to defense, far below NATO's requirement. The criticism has intensified following the release of Aaron Gunn's documentary Forsaken Warriors: How Trudeau Broke Canada's Military, which highlights the government's neglect of the armed forces. The film includes interviews with veterans and experts who condemn the deterioration of military equipment, poor treatment of veterans, and the government's controversial efforts to wokeify the military, such as relaxing dress codes and installing tampon dispensers in men's washrooms, measures that have failed to improve recruitment. Despite Trudeau's promise to reach the 2% target by 2032, critics argue that Canada has diminished its standing as a global middle power. So, has Canada become an embarrassment on the world stage?
Well, I think what's tough for Canada is, as it's stated here, they've always been sort of a global middle power. And they've been in the room with bigger players, with superpowers. So if you think about that, you sort of have a duty to do more. You have a duty to try harder and to be a bigger contributor in the way that you can contribute, because you don't really deserve to be in the room, in a sense, right? And that's how I feel sort of about Canada at scale, whether it's economics, whether it's military, whether it's really anything. But we've got this pompous attitude. Trudeau's got this pompous attitude, like he carries a lot more weight in the world. And then because he stands on some ridiculous moral high ground of ideological nonsense, that's how he behaves. So that's how he's kind of treated Canada this whole time. Like, I don't need to do this. I'm already up here. I'm already this important. And this is sort of where we've landed. He just has got no real grasp on reality, because any leader in our country should be doing what I said. We should be making sure that we are doing as much as possible to stay in, to maintain and improve our relationships with these organizations, with these groups. I don't really agree with a lot of the global organizations. It's not really my thing. But if you think about it from an economic perspective, being in these groups is something that has been effective for Canadians. So do what you can to stay involved in them. Our production continues to slide. Our military continues to slide. Production across the board under Trudeau. They're saying, why are you in the G7? You don't produce anything anymore. It's gotten significantly worse over the last 10 years. So you kind of look and you go, well, this has been reasonable for Canadians. And I know economists can argue with me, but it does provide Canadians with certain opportunities having these relationships with how the world currently runs. Now, you and I both agree we're going to have to go to more domestic production over the years, over the next 20 years or so. But for now, it's positive to stay within these groups. When you talk about a military alliance, here's the thing with the world right now. We don't agree with war, but you've got two sides, the East and the West. You have to be associated or aligned with one side. You need to sort of buy your way into protection. That's how this game works, unfortunately. All we have to do is hit our spending target. I think we should be exceeding our spending target. I think we should be improving it, not by a lot, but by enough that says, hey, we're here. We're doing the best we can, because our GDP is significantly lower than your other nations that are a part of this group. Let us show you that we're here. We're going to do the best we can, and we're going to contribute. Be humble about it and do more. Don't do less and act like an asshole, which is what this guy is doing across the board. So have we become an embarrassment on the world stage? Yes. Is it something we can rectify? Yes, I think it is. But it's wake-up calls like this that we need to sort of correct course. That being said, the Liberal government's not going to do it.
Well, one of the things that, because it can, I'm sure some people watching could say it kind of off as hypocritical of being like, how would you complain about trying to get forced out of this when you talk about leaving it? Like that you don't want, that you don't appreciate NATO or the UN or what they've become, so you think Canada should leave it. So isn't
I
it?
think we should leave the UN.
Well,
that's fine. But
well,
like
no,
NATO and the G7, I can see a different purpose and value for it.
This is my point with it. There is a very big difference between not going to a party you're invited to and getting kicked out of a party with embarrassment.
Yes.
One signals self-reliance and independence.
Yes.
In going, I'm okay. I don't need to be part of your party.
Yeah.
The other is a lack of showing that people don't respect you. They don't want you at that party.
Right.
And that is very important on the global stage, because if you get kicked out of it, let's say, and obviously you can't just make this decision tomorrow because our military is shit, but like comparatively, and Trudeau has drove it into the ground because of all of these social justice causes and crap like that. But one of the things is that if we were to actually have a capable military and then say, we're okay, we don't need to be part of this defense, because I think it is far more likely that Canada would ever find itself in a conflict protecting a nation on the other side of the world and putting ourselves into harm's risk for that purpose than it would be us being attacked and having other countries come to our aid. So
Right.
I don't see it actually being that beneficial to Canada from a security perspective as much as it is to other countries if we were to adhere to these things. But yeah, like if you get kicked out of something like that because you're shown to be incompetent, then that just sends a signal to all of the nations that are hostile towards you and go, they're weak.
Yeah, so my perspective is, I always say the global organizations like the WHO, the UN, get the fuck out. I don't want anything to do with them. I'm good with that. And I would not change my perspective. The G7 is more of an economic agreement with advanced economies. I'm sure you can poke holes in it and say that we don't need to be a part of it. I think it does signal that we're making the wrong moves economically if we get kicked out, like you said. With respect to NATO, again, I don't really agree with war, but I think it's a risk you shouldn't take. I agree with you that it's more likely that we're going to end up over there fighting someone than having to defend ourselves here. But I don't want to take that risk because we are at a time, like we just discussed, where weapons are wildly out of control. All this other stuff can happen, blah, 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 whatever. That being said, you and I both agree that one of the few purposes government should have is defending your borders. And to do so, you need a military. Our military is so dilapidated because he's put so little money into it. They can't even adequately defend this country, let alone contribute on a global stage. So I'm of the opinion that you can kind of kill two birds with one stone here. Hit your 2% target, then we would finally have adequate defense for our own nation, and we'd be able to kind of keep NATO happy and be a part of the global group. So I think you kind of get both by just kind of meeting the bare minimum. You know what I mean? So I think there's some value in that. But again, I'm of them. If I had to pick between being in NATO and not being in NATO, as long as it's around, I think it makes more sense to be in it because I don't think it's worth the risk not to be.
I don't think it. I would typically agree with you on the face of things, but knowing how NATO is operating these days, I don't, because again, the way that I see this comes down to is it's a security versus liberty trade-off.
Okay.
So on the one hand, you'd like to stay a part of NATO because of the security it offers, right?
Yes.
Well, we also need to factor in the decision that all of these censorship controls are being top-down implemented through NATO and their policies. Even look at what they have, like NATO pointed out that what it deems as disinformation when it comes to all of these online censorship campaigns is going against NATO's operatives and goals. So like literally do what NATO says, otherwise we're going to censor you. All of that kind of stuff that's coming through here, the censorship on Ukraine and those wars over there, that's all being directed by NATO. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to trade off freedom of speech in our country for some global, quote unquote, assurance of security.
Yeah, when you put it like that, I guess if you make sense, you know what, it's hard actually to disagree with that. Because you kind of have to buy in wholesale,
if it was merely the safety that, and that's it, it's just like, okay, we do 2% of 2% of GDP spending, and then you get access to the safety and whatever, then 100%. But when it comes off with that trade-off of liberty, that's when I have an issue.
I guess I'd have to say that I'm undecided then right now, because I that's a really good point. I'd have to do a little more research and understanding on how the NATO's plan of action is implemented on the national stage. The reason I say that is because the UN also has an initiative to fight misinformation and disinformation. And I'm not sure if, NATO is the same as the UN. We're like, hey, here's the idea. Take it if you want, don't if you don't want to. Because that's kind of how the UN works. Because they're like, oh, the UN says this. They go, we don't care. Hog off, dude. We're going to do what we want, which you're seeing with Israel. A lot right now anyway. So I guess I agree with you. If it is all or nothing, then you're probably right. It's probably better to be nothing. But if it is, you can take the defense and kind of pick and choose some of the other things, then I would stay in. But I think I'm undecided.
And I think too, when it comes to the safety conversation, something to keep in mind is like, look at what NATO countries are doing to secure Ukraine right now, which isn't even a NATO country. Now imagine, even if Canada wasn't part of NATO, now imagine a foreign country starts invading Canada. Like, it would be Ukraine on steroids, because now you're dealing with a country that's bordering America. And again, you can look at that as like leeching off of it. It's just the way it is.
Well, we've already been leeching off of.
As long as America is the military superpower and we're right next to America, no matter what is, other than if America decided to ever be like, yeah, we're going to take Canada too. But if any other nation tried to find their way into Canada, America would have a real fucking issue.
Yeah, that's a fair point. All right, so we've concluded that we can leave NATO. Don't need the G7, don't need NATO, but we want to leave on our own accord. Fuck you, Trudeau.
The trade
swore a lot today.
The G7 and the economic prosperity and the free trade and all of that kind of stuff, for sure. But actually, in hell, there's even an argument that free trade on the global front can only happen if there is an international order of security. Like, the only reason that globalization can take place is because America polices the globe.
Yeah.
Because like, how can I free trade with China if along the way pirates were seizing everything we traded? That free trade only exists because America is like, we'll fuck up any pirates.
Yeah. Okay. So how about we just create some new organizations?
I guess what I'm trying to get at is this shit's complicated. And even like,
that's true.
And as much as I have my strong feelings on it, I still try to remind myself that you're like, okay, there is always consequences no matter what. That's
fair. That's fair. I mean, I guess at the end of the day, you kind of have to ask, I agree with you. You won me over there, but I also have to ask, even if you didn't have NATO, are these political elites going to be like, then say whatever you want now? We don't have to worry about that censorship stuff. I don't think so. So I mean, they're after our free speech anyway.
But I think I think they would still want to do that kind of stuff, but the stakes wouldn't be as high, because they wouldn't see it as like, oh, we need to censor in order for war efforts. Yeah. Like, I mean, even actually, hell, go back to, I believe it was World War I. Yeah, I believe it was the First World War. America was locking people up for spreading quote unquote propaganda that was anti-American military efforts. So you're like, free in those moments, war is the highest stakes ever. So if you've got censorship under normal circumstances, it's going to be a light touch, but in war, it's like, 5X, we're not fucking 10X. Around. We're not fucking around.
Yeah.
And you can actually kind of even see a point for that, because like, even that's why I'm so against military conflicts in a sense, is because once they start, the only option is winning. Like, I'm sorry, like even I, in that scenario, like if we were in a hot war with a foreign country, I'd probably be like, yeah, okay, our only option is to win. So like certain civil liberties are gonna go. It's just how it's gonna happen. So that's why I like to try to not get into that circumstance in the first place.
Yeah, that's fair.
All right. Anything else you wanted to add today?
That is everything.
All right. Thank you again for listening. And if you enjoy the show and want to support what we do, you can head over to our Substack, where you can subscribe for just $5 a month. And that gets you exclusive podcast episodes, original articles, and a direct line to Jonathan and myself. And for those of you who have already subscribed, thank you very much for the support, and we'll catch you next time.
Hi, everybody.